Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto was the owner of a cafe diner. Even the gods and goddesses of Olympus needed a day off. Sometimes they needed time away from the constant bickering and never-ending controversies of their family. On one such day, Wisdom and Moon found themselves discovering a hidden gem within the city that never sleeps, and meeting a familiar blonde knucklehead with a penchant for the color orange. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 1, Part 1. Dining with Divinity. I'm glad we did this. It's been so long since it was just the two of us. Athena said, a content smile on her face as she walked the streets of Manhattan. Being one of the busiest out of her family, she took the time to enjoy the rare days she had off, where she could decompress and let the responsibilities of godhood slip away from her shoulders. Dressed in regular clothes like the mortals her family ruled over, she tried not to stand out as she walked the stone streets of New York. To her right, her sister Artemis walked beside her. The daughters of Zeus took solace in each other's company, the similarities between them helping to form the bridge between their close sisterly relationship in their early days of existence. Out of all the gods and goddesses on Olympus, Athena felt her most comfortable when she was with her younger sister. There was no game with Artemis, and no need to keep one eye over her shoulder. The bonds of sisterhood were strong between them, and Athena knew she could rely on Artemis to have her back. I agree. Though I'm not usually one for the concrete jungle of New York, I'm enjoying our quality time together. It's been months since it was only us. Artemis replied. Like her sister, she was dressed in casual mortal clothes, giving up her usual silver parka and camouflage pants. Her lieutenant, Zoe, could handle looking after the hunt for an afternoon and had her utmost trust to keep the girls in line. I would give anything to stay away from Olympus right now. Agreed. Hera is on the warpath again, and I have no desire to be in her way. Athena replied. Her last memory of the queen was watching the beautiful woman storming towards Zeus's temple, the earth cracking beneath her sandals and her eyes radiating godly power. She didn't need to be the goddess of wisdom to understand what was happening. Whenever Hera found out Zeus had cheated on her again, all of Olympus fled from the incoming war zone. Nothing good came from an argument between the king and queen, and no god or goddess had any desire to get wrapped up in the quarrel. Even Hestia would slip away and make herself scarce. Despite their feelings on the matter, the Olympian daughters of Zeus couldn't fault Hera for her outbursts and shouting matches with her husband. Hera's temper was legendary. People wonder why we remain virgins and refuse to take husbands. Case in point, Artemis joked, pointing up to the sky, and making her sister laugh. Seeing Zeus's volatile marriage to Hera would turn most people off of the concept of marriage. When one half of the married couple was not as committed as the other, then it made said marriage redundant in their eyes. From what they could gather by the volatile argument Zeus and Hera got into on the winter solstice, Zeus had fathered a little girl somewhere in California 3 years ago, and the mother had brought her to Manhattan. Her name was Thalia, named after one of the muses, and was the first child born to their father since before World War II. Their father and their uncles had vowed to never sire another demigod. It was their effort to avoid the next great prophecy from coming to fruition. No one expected the vow to last, and unsurprisingly, Zeus was the first one to give in to his lust. The king of the gods had no luck when it came to keeping it in his pants, and his willpower towards beautiful women was weak. It seemed to be a trait that ran in their immortal family. They weren't sure what happened to the pair, but they were turned away at the door of the Empire State Building by the guard. The chill of the December month nipped at their skin, though the feeling didn't bother the pair of goddesses as it did to mortals. They'd walked the streets for a couple of hours, conversing like they would with complete comfortability with each other. It was a couple of days after the winter solstice, and the mortal holiday Christmas had been days earlier. The streets were bustling with people, filled with mortals taking advantage of the post-Christmas deals. Mortals were very focused on having the latest product of just about anything and everything in today's era. They wondered if Aphrodite had something to do with that. They wouldn't put it past the goddess of love. Speaking of the goddess of love, the daughters of Zeus ensured they weren't followed by the daughter of Uranus, spreading their essence throughout the world, making it harder for anyone to locate them. Aphrodite had a habit of showing up in the middle of their sisterly days out, taking over completely and forcing them to go to the places she wanted to go and do the things she wanted to do. While Athena could tolerate being around Aphrodite, the day would usually end up with Artemis and Aphrodite getting in an argument. It would always start with Aphrodite throwing an offhanded comment her way, and Artemis taking it as an insult. On more than one occasion, Athena had to physically restrain the goddess of the moon, and call upon Hestia to take Aphrodite back to Olympus before the two goddesses went at it. In terms of fighting capabilities, Artemis was the superior fighter in every way and was one of Olympus's best fighters. However, Aphrodite could be deceptively cunning, and being the youngest daughter of Ouranos, she boasted greater raw power than both of them. A battle between love and the moon could only result in utter chaos on a global scale. I'm feeling hungry. We could see if it's safe to return to Olympus? I bet we could convince Aunt Hestia to whip us up something. Artemis asked, a gleam in her eye. No one loved their aunt's cooking more than Artemis. Athena thought about it. I could go for something, but let's stay in the city for now. I have no desire to run into Hera, or father. We'll be there for hours if they try to talk about their problems with us. Agreed. Do you have anywhere in mind? Not particularly. Perhaps we could dash. Athena started, but stopped when something caught her eye. What's that? Artemis hummed, turning in the direction Athena was looking in. They were somewhere in the West Village, and her sister's attention was solely on the small building that stood on the corner of 90th Bedford Street. It looked like any other building in the West Village, but the front of the restaurant on the ground floor stood out next to the gray-colored stone. In particular, the front of the building was made mostly out of glass but was met by a bright orange frame and door that stood in the center of the building. An open sign hung behind the glass door, and across the frame sat the name of the establishment, the Fox's Denmark. The Fox's Den? I've never heard of such a place. Neither have I, and I know every building and store in New York like the back of my hand. It must be new. Athena said back, her curiosity piquing. Shall we? Artemis made a motion with her hand. Lead the way, sister. Lead she did, with the two goddesses making their way towards the Fox's Den, interest piquing their thoughts. Well, for Athena at least. Artemis, on the other hand, was just hungry. She felt like she could eat course after course right now. A bell went off when they walked through the door, a shroud of warmth blanketing over them and making the sisters hum in content. It was well lit and open and appeared bigger than either anticipated. Along the wall on the right were a couple of booths, while more than a dozen round tables with comfy-looking chairs scattered across the room and next to the windows. A counter stood at the side with a swinging door leading into another room behind it, with a glass cabinet sat next to it. Inside, Artemis spied cakes and other delicacies of all shapes lined up neatly in multiple rows. The smell of rich and freshly made pastries wafted through the room, accompanied by a mix of coffee and chocolate. The delightful aroma made both women shiver in delight, reminding them of Aunt Hestia's treats back on Olympus. They quickly realized it was more of a cafe diner than a restaurant, but neither looked like they minded. Will this do? Athena asked, and tried not to laugh when she found her sister staring into the glass cabinet, her face pressing against the glass. Despite her reputation, Artemis was a child goddess at heart. It all looks amazing, Artemis whispered, admiring the delicate frosting that coated the carrot cake. Athena leaned down next to her and had to admit they all look amazing. Sometimes, it amazed her at the handiwork of mortals. While she wasn't known for possessing as strong of a sweet tooth as Artemis, she liked to treat herself every now and again with something sweet. Thank you for the compliment. Athena's eyes trailed away from the sweet treats and found an amused young man looking back at her from over the counter. His chin rested in his palm, and a big grin sat on his face. Most would never dare to lean so close to her, much less Artemis, but it wasn't like he knew who they were. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Artemis tense up, and her facial expression turned colder than before. Her silver eyes bore into the man's blue ones with quick intensity, as if silently telling him not to come any closer. Her silver eyes gently glowed in warning, though only enough for Athena to notice. To the man's credit, he didn't look affected. He looked more amused if anything by Artemis and reached behind the counter and pulled out 2 menus. Here, these are for you both. Take your pick where you would like to sit, and I'll be with you shortly. He straightened up, getting rid of the grin and giving the goddesses a polite smile in return. Thank you, Athena politely replied, and led Artemis away by the wrist to a nearby table by the window, whispering, "Stop glaring." Artemis shook her head, "Sorry. He surprised me, that's all. I didn't realize someone was behind the counter." "Well, you were close to drooling over the carrot cake he had in there." "I can't blame you," Athena teased, silently laughing as Artemis's cheeks had a tinge of gold wash over them in embarrassment. "Not a word," Artemis replied, giving her sister a pointed look before both opened up their menus. The first thing that caught their attention was the variety. There was a lot to choose from, far more than other cafe diners they visited. Some of the choices were unique to witness for this type of establishment. Looking around, the room was half full, and Athena gazed across the tables to see what people were eating. Most were drinking coffee, which didn't surprise her, but she spied a couple of meals. In the corner, she saw a gentleman eating eggs Benedict, and by the moans coming from his mouth, he was enjoying his food a great deal. Looking over her menu, she failed to hide her smile when she looked at her sister. Artemis looked lost in the options, her silver eyes twinkling. If Athena was betting a person, she bet her sister was devouring the options in the dessert and cake section. When a few minutes passed, the man from the counter appeared by the table, a small notebook in his hand. No longer standing behind the counter, Athena and Artemis got a good look at him. If they had to guess, he looked the same age as Athena in her current form, somewhere in his mid-20s. He was blonde with bright azure eyes. His skin was tanned and looked like he belonged on a beach somewhere in California. He was tall, around the same height as Apollo and Hermes in their mortal forms, and was built lean. He was dressed in smart casual wear, with dark jeans and a white shirt, and around his waist was a black apron with the logo of the diner on the front in orange. At first glance, they thought he was a son of Apollo since he had the typical traits of their brother's demigod children. However, getting a sense of the man, they couldn't sense any godly connection that a demigod typically had. "Good afternoon, and welcome to the Fox's Den. My name is Naruto, it's nice to meet you both," he introduced and glanced at Artemis. "I'm sorry if I startled you earlier." Artemis narrowed her eyes up at the man but saw no ill will in his gaze. "It's fine, but you didn't startle me. I was just engrossed in your selections in the cabinet, that's all." "I see. Thank you for the compliment, though. I'm glad you liked what you saw." His words sounded sincere, and Artemis couldn't sense him playing any game. He didn't appear bothered by their beauty, unlike others in the room who kept glancing at them from the corners of their eyes. It wasn't every day two beautiful women of their standard walked into a place like this. Perhaps he would be tolerable. "Did the owner make them all?" she asked, nodding in the direction of the cabinet. "Most of them, yes. Some came from the suppliers, but most of them are from my hands," he admitted. "You're the owner?" "I am." Artemis didn't say much else. He felt her gaze linger on him before it slipped back to the menu. He took that as his cue to move on and turned to Athena. "Naruto, you say?" Athena asked, leaning back on her chair and appearing amused by his name. Her gray eyes sparkled with curiosity. It's rare to meet someone with a Japanese name, and yet doesn't appear to hold any ties to Japan. He laughed. "I guess you could say my parents had a flair for exotic names." "I see that. I must say, your menu is unique. It's not like other menus you see for a cafe diner like this one." Athena mentioned. "Any reason for that?" She didn't know what she expected for him to say, but she didn't expect him to shrug. "Not really. I'm fortunate enough that I've traveled the world and learned all types of different delicacies each country has to offer. I did think about creating a restaurant, but I've always preferred cafe diners. I find them to be more intimate and gives you more of a chance to get to know the people that visit." Athena nodded. "Did you ever get a chance to visit Greece?" "I happen to be Greek myself. Burro, kai vrika ton chrono moustin elida poly of Shristo. I can, and I found my time very enjoyable." Both Athena and Artemis looked surprised at his sudden language change. It wasn't often they met someone in New York who could speak Greek. It wasn't a language most people chose to learn, unlike French or Spanish. Getting over her surprise, Athena gave him an appraising look. I'm impressed. You speak well, and fluently. Thank you. It took a long time, but I finally managed to catch on. He replied, before clicking the top of his pen. Are you both ready to order? I think so, Artemis muttered, giving her sister a pointed look before looking back at the blonde. I'll take a hot chocolate, with a slice of the carrot cake. Could I also have a dash of vanilla in my drink, please? Absolutely. He replied, before adding, would you like whipped cream and chocolate sprinkles on your hot chocolate? I would, yes. I'll take a latte, please. Like my sister, I'll have a dash of vanilla in my drink, and may I ask, what is your special dessert of the day? Athena asked. Her interest peaked when she saw that little nugget on the menu. Of course. The speciality today is a lemon curd Italiano semifreddo. He told her and failed to hide his smile when he saw her eyes sparkle. She liked the sound of that. That sounds wonderful. I'll have that, please. Naruto nodded, and wrote down the order. Absolutely. You're in luck, we ran out an hour ago, but I've got the next batch almost ready. It will take about 10 minutes if you don't mind waiting. It's proved to be very popular today. That would be fine. Athena nodded and watched him walk away. When he walked back behind the counter, she turned to her sister and noticed her silver eyes gazing straight at her. What? I didn't say anything. No, but you look like you want to say something. It's nothing. I'm just noticing how chummy you were with the man. Athena rolled her eyes and scoffed. I was merely caught off guard by the way he spoke Greek. It's not every day someone in New York can speak fluent Greek. If he can learn a second language, and open up his own business, it means he's got one of these. Athena poked the side of her head, plus he's the only one not leering in our direction, which is nice. I swear, if that man in the corner licks his lips in my direction one more time, I will throw this knife straight into his eye. She picked up the knife and toyed with it between her fingers. You know I would. Oh, I know you would, sister. Athena laughed, plucking the knife out of her sister's hand and putting it back on the table. The last thing she wanted was her sister to make a scene. Artemis huffed and tried to look annoyed at her sister, but started to laugh along with Athena as her sister gently kicked her under the table. We should do this more often. It's nice to get away from everyone. I agree. It's not like my hunters are incapable of looking after themselves once a week. I think once a week would be lovely. It wasn't long before they were interrupted by the blonde barista, who placed their drinks on the table in front of them. Both goddesses looked impressed with their orders and recognized the signs of someone taking care and pride in their work. Artemis did her best to keep her face from drooping as the delightful smell of her hot chocolate wafted around her nose. It smelled just like the hot chocolate Hestia would prepare for her. Athena had a similar expression on her face, wrapping her hand around the warm mug. When he placed Artemis's carrot cake in front of her, the goddess licked her lips, her sweet tooth craving for the treat. While Naruto prepared Athena's order, the two quietly drank their drinks, both relaxing into their seats as the taste touched their lips. Both let out a sigh of delight, impressed by their orders. It was easy to make a bad drink, but it was difficult to make a great one. So far, they would give the barista credit where credit was due. However, when Artemis had the first bite of her carrot cake, Athena couldn't help but giggle as her sister started demolishing the baked good. I take it the cake is good? She asked, but didn't get an answer. Her sister was too engrossed with the cake to reply, her mouth too full to form words. A thumbs up would suffice. When he returned, he was surprised to find both Artemis's mug empty and her plate void of any cake. Wow, I guess you liked it, huh? He said, before motioning to her nose. You have a little something on your nose. It was whipped cream from her drink. Artemis's eyes widened and swiped at her nose with her palm. She stared at her sister with irritation, hissing, I had whipped cream on my nose. Why didn't you tell me? Athena laughed to herself, I thought you'd realize eventually. She teased, before noticing the plate in his hand, for me. He nodded, for you. I hope you enjoy. Let me know if I can get you anything else. He told them, and started to leave before he saw Artemis looking his way. Can I get you another drink? Same again, please. Drink and cake. she said, making him smile and head back to the counter. She looked at her sister and noticed her looking down at the plate, her fork in hand. Artemis wasn't one to praise a mortal often, especially a male mortal. However, she had to admit the lemon curd Italiano semifreddo he made looked divine. It looked like something you'd find in high-class mortal society. Hell, it was something she imagined Hera serving at her temple. Well, aren't you going to try it? I want to, but I feel like it would be a shame to ruin it, Athena whispered, admiring the delicate work that must have come with making it. She was no incredible chef like Hestia, Hera, or grandmother Rhea, but Athena occasionally liked to dabble in the kitchen the mortal way. She found there was something therapeutic about cooking, and she understood why so many mortals took it upon themselves to learn. It must have taken him years of practice to achieve such quality of work. It took a moment, but slowly Athena dug her fork into the lemon curd. The texture was light and fluffy, and she watched it jiggle around as she brought it up to her mouth. Taking a bite, Artemis watched as Athena fell back against her chair, her rhythmic breathing making her sister lean forward in anticipation. Judging by the expression on her sister's face, the dessert had gone over well. Her composed elder sister rarely let her cool visage slip, always retaining a mask of dignity that kept her true feelings behind closed doors. Athena wasn't the kind of goddess that wore her feelings on her sleeve, but Artemis was one of the few that could see behind that visage. It was always a pleasant experience for the goddess of the moon to see her composed sister drop all pretenses and enjoy something for what it was. Then, out of nowhere, Athena let out a loud moan of delight that caught everyone's attention. Okay. That might have taken it a step too far. The whole room fell quiet, and every mortal within the establishment, male and female, gaped and blushed in Athena's direction. Artemis couldn't stop the flush of gold from lacing her cheeks. She gawked at her sister, looking between her and the plate. Even she wasn't that bad. It sounded so sexual. Ah, Athena. What in the name of Hades was that? Coming to her senses, Athena couldn't stop her eyes from widening. It's not what you think. That was a lie and she knew it. The moment she realized what she had just done, Athena brought up her free hand up to her mouth in shock horror. She didn't dare look around the room at the gaping mortals, but the blonde owner was in her viewpoint, and she could see his surprise and disbelief. I can't believe I just did that, she thought. Never in her more than 4,000 years of existence, had she ever publicly done something so candid. What made it worse was doing it in public. What the hell is wrong with me? She hid her face, the embarrassment worse than the time she tried to play the flute in front of the other gods. When he walked back over, Athena didn't dare look him in the eye. After he provided Artemis with her second round of orders, he stopped and whispered to Athena, "I'm glad you enjoyed it." He smiled politely, and before she could reply, he walked away. Oh God, what must he have been thinking? Hey, Blondie, he stopped and turned around, and everyone looked towards an older woman who was sat a few tables over. She pointed at Athena, "I'll have what she's having." Athena groaned and hid her face in her hands. She wished the earth would swallow her up for eternity. What a day. When the last customer left the fox's den, Naruto breathed a sigh of relief as swapped the open sign to close. Seeking the comfort of the nearest chair, he finally had a moment to put his feet up and let the day wash over him. Whoever thought running a business would be stressful? Not him, that's for sure. Other people made it look so easy. Not to mention, the movies made it look like a piece of cake. He could with all confidence say that it was not easy. Catching Tora the cat on a D-rank mission was easier. However, as stressful as the job was, this was the path he chose to acclimate into modern-day life. As it turned out, he was very good at it. Cooking and baking had always been a hobby of his, and something he found therapeutic. Feeding fulfilled a survival need for all living creatures, and the feeling of fulfillment came not only from the good of the act of giving but also the fact that we have helped in some form. Cooking for others helps bond human beings to loved ones and fellow humans. At least, that's how he saw it. There was also the fact that people loved cake and coffee. Both played huge parts in humanity's daily life that it seemed like a given. Rubbing his forehead with his forearm, he clapped his hands together. All right guys, you know what to do. The door that led to the kitchen and the back room swung open, and 3 of his shadow clones marched out in a single file, giving the original Naruto a salute as they started the evening's cleanup. The evening had been a busy one with the post-Christmas rush. A lot of families had stopped by and spent the majority of the evening, as well as couples of all ages enjoying the post-Christmas bliss and exploring the post-Christmas deals throughout the city. Perhaps he should have opened up in the new year like he originally intended. At least, that way, he could ease into modern life a little easier, without having to deal with the Christmas holidays, and all it brought with it. Humanity sure had changed. Though, he did notice the festive and seasonal beverages went over a treat with his customers, and he was already thinking about what to do once January arrived. Humanity sure had a sweet tooth. Well, at least no one has complained as of yet. Everything seems to have gone over well. With that thought, his mind turned to a memory from earlier that day. The image of the two beautiful sisters that entered his establishment crossed his mind. Both women were equally as pleased with their orders, though one was certainly more vocal than the other. Naruto had almost dropped the other woman's order when the moan of pure delight reached his ears. He was no blushing virgin, but the fact remained it caught him by surprise. He was aware food could be an aphrodisiac, but he didn't think it was to that high of a degree. The sisters had stayed for an hour after that, with the one with gray eyes remaining silent for the remainder of their stay, too embarrassed to say another word, while the other demolished another 2 servings of hot chocolate and carrot cake. Where the auburn-haired sister put it all, he didn't know, but it was impressive to watch. Anything he put in front of her vanished within minutes. Not since Elagabalus of Rome had he seen someone devour his culinary wonders with such gusto. Heck, even Elvis in his later years had some form of restraint. What a peculiar pair of women they were. He hoped they came back again soon. Watching his clones wipe down the tables, and take the empty plates and cups to the back, he stood up and stretched his back, humming in wonder as he felt those necessary pops in his back. Taking the broom out of the closet, he got to work in doing his part before heading home for the night and doing it all over again tomorrow. Chapter 2, Part 2 Dining with Divinity. Athena, come on. We need to hurry. Artemis called out, her patience wearing thin as she paced around Athena's library. I'll be a moment more. Just wait one more minute, Artemis. You said that 5 minutes ago. Don't you understand time is of the essence? The response the goddess of the moon received back was a delicate laugh from her sister, accompanied by the sound of one of Athena's many rolling ladders connected to the hundreds, possibly thousands of bookcases that housed Athena's books. If one was to imagine what the personal library belonging to the goddess of wisdom looked like, all one had to do was imagine the New York Public Library, and then magnify it many times over. Only then would someone begin to imagine how endless and ever-growing it appeared to those who were not the goddess herself. Even Artemis, after thousands of years of visiting her sister in her temple on Mount Olympus, still required the aid of Glaucus, Athena's companion, to navigate her way through. If it were any other occasion, then Artemis would be in a more patient mood. However, it had been 3 weeks since their last outing together, and Artemis had been counting down the minutes for their next trip to her new favorite spot in the city. Their plan to spend sisterly time together once a week hit a pair of road bumps called Zeus and Hera, with the 2 elder gods pulling them away the moment they returned from their last outing weeks ago. Neither Athena nor Artemis had much time to spare after that. When they weren't fulfilling their duties to their godly domains, they were on Olympus, aiding their aunts in playing peacekeeper between the king and queen. It was frustrating to no end, but neither could find the right opportunity to slip away without being noticed. Now, 3 weeks on, some form of normalcy was beginning to return. Although Zeus was still forbidden from entering Hera's temple, the queen had finally ceased in stirring up a shouting match with her husband. In everyone's minds, the month of June couldn't come quick enough. Pacing within Athena's temple, the goddess of the moon knew why Athena was stalling. Her embarrassment from their first visit was still fresh in their mind, and Artemis was well aware her sister did not do well with embarrassing situations, especially when she was at the center of it. For what must have been the first time in her immortal life, Artemis was looking forward to delicious food that was made by a member of the opposite sex. Who knew miracles could happen? I swear to Hades, Athena, if you don't hurry up I'm leaving without you. Don't you understand she could appear at any moment? She's done it before. Fine. Fine. I'm coming. True to her words, the sounds of Athena's rolling ladder grew louder, and the goddess of wisdom appeared on Artemis's right field of vision. She was stood on the mid-step, carrying half a dozen books tucked between her arms. To Artemis's relief, Athena was already dressed for their outing to the mortal world, her dark hair neatly tied up in a high ponytail. Though it only took a click of their fingers to change their attire, the younger of the two goddesses wasn't willing to waste another second. "I can finish these later. Let's go before you wear down my floor with your constant pacing." Athena had barely stepped off the ladder and discarded her books when she felt her sister grab a hold of her wrist and proceed to drag her out of her temple. "Honestly, Artemis, I'm more than capable of walking by myself." Athena didn't get a response back. She quickened her pace, bringing her level with her younger sister, and noticed her silver eyes darting between bookcases. "You don't remember the way out, do you? You keep changing the layout. Just stick to one design and keep to it." A laugh escaped Athena, before gently escaping Artemis's grip and taking the lead between the two sisters. "Follow me." Having designed the latest layout of her library, she could understand why other members of her family found themselves lost within her temple. An underlying rule on Olympus was that gods and goddesses don't teleport directly into each other's temples. Their temples were like their own personal and private space. A place they could escape from the world, and from the crazier members of their family. However, despite the no teleporting rule, it didn't stop the more annoying members from waltzing through the front doors like they owned the place. Artemis was one of the few Athena gave express permission to enter her temple, knowing her sister would not exploit or betray her trust. "You need to make a map of this place. It would make life a lot easier," Artemis muttered, though she perked up when she saw the exit. "What? And run the risk of Apollo or Hermes getting their hands on it? Not a chance." Their younger brothers, Hermes in particular, could be notorious pranksters if the chance arose. The two male gods were arguably each other's best friend despite their rough start when the god of messengers stole Apollo's cattle. Since then, the two were as thick as thieves, and two of Olympus's biggest playboys. The idea of them getting a hold of her library's layout sent shivers down her spine. Her spear would run with godly itcher if the pair ever tried anything. As soon as they were out, Artemis's pace quickened as they headed for the golden doors to Athena's temple. "Come on," she ushered, trying to get her sister to walk faster. "I don't know where that damn Aphrodite is, but I don't want her catching us. I don't know how she does it, but she's sneakier than some of the deadliest creatures I hunt. She has this habit of appearing at the most inconvenient moment." All right," Athena replied, her heels clicking against her temple floor. "I don't think I've seen you this excited in a long time. That mortal has certainly left an impression on you. Don't read too much into it." Artemis insisted, her eyes never leaving the set of golden doors as they got closer. "His establishment provides a warm and comforting aura, and it's nice to be in the presence of a male that didn't spend the entire time leering at us. It's a refreshing feeling." A dusting of golden ichor washed over her cheeks. His food and hot chocolate were nice too. A bark of laughter escaped Athena. "I think we both know you liked it more than that. What were the words you used after we left?" Athena tapped her chin. "Oh, that's right. It feels like someone poured ambrosia and nectar all over our taste buds, and covered us in a warm blanket. I don't remember saying anything like that." "Funny, because I do." Yes, well," Artemis stuttered, as she pressed her hand on the doors and pushed it open. At least I didn't let out a loud and sexual moan after a single bite of lemon curd." This time it was Athena's turn to splutter in surprise. It was not a sexual moan." "Yes, it was." "No, it wasn't. Besides, how would you know? Don't turn this around on me." The two sisters narrowed their eyes at one another. Though close, the sisters did have the odd tiff, as rare as it was. As Artemis prepared to throw another barb her sister's way and Athena was trying to come up with an excuse for her past action, the rich smell of perfume hit the pair of goddesses like a ton of bricks. Their bodies froze and slowly turned their heads in the direction of the door where a haze of pink smoke enveloped the doorway to Athena's temple. Neither could say a word as the very person they were trying to avoid being caught by appeared in all her stunning glory. Currently possessing baby blue eyes that shined as bright as sapphires, with bouncy dark chocolate curls that hung down to the middle of her back, the goddess of love was midway through knocking on the door when she noticed Athena and Artemis standing in her way. Aphrodite blinked in surprise, but soon became a bundle of joy as she clapped her hands together, seemingly oblivious to the frozen stares she was getting. "Oh, how wonderful! I was about to come and find you both, but you've saved me the trouble," she said. Reaching forward, neither Athena nor Artemis could do anything as Aphrodite looped an arm through each of their arms, and marched them out onto the streets of Olympus. "Let's have a girls' day. Just the three of us. Won't that be terrific?" The goddess of love wasn't giving either of her fellow goddesses a chance to back out. This was happening whether they wanted it or not. As their senses returned to them, Artemis shot Athena a look of betrayal as she realized the predicament she was now stuck in. "I told you this would happen." All Athena could do was sigh, and thank the fates that Aphrodite hadn't appeared seconds earlier. Stretching his arms out in front of him, the blonde owner of the Fox's Den found himself leaning against the counter as he stared out the window and across the street. Trying to repress a yawn from breaking out, he turned and looked across the inside of the den, taking in the people that were visiting. It had been a slow day compared to the last couple of weeks, but with Christmas over and children returning to school and adults returning to work, a routine was beginning to form through his weekdays. Saturday was always going to busy, while Sunday he was only open for half a day. Even he needed a break and time to rest. Boy, the last hour is dragging. Right now, he was in the middle of the slow period. The afternoon rush during lunch had proven to be one of his business periods of the day, some opting to stay in while others chose to take their food away with them and find a quiet spot to eat in solitude away from the bustling streets. It was a few minutes past 2, and the people slowly filtered out until the room was only a third of the way full. It wasn't that he wasn't enjoying the peace, but there was something about the pressure from the swarm of people all coming in at once that got his blood going. In the back room, he knew his clones were hard at work. At least, that's what he was hoping anyway. Even after all this time, his clones still had a habit of doing things their way when they got antsy, but those moments had become few and far between. These days, they did as they were told, and he was thankful for it. Noticing a hand waving at him from one of the tables next to the window, he smiled and walked over with his notepad and pen in his apron pocket. "Another black coffee for you, ma'am?" he asked, watching as the young blonde woman stared down at the papers spread out on the table. From what he gathered, the young woman was in the middle of her training to become a teacher. Math, if he remembered right. She'd come in 2 hours ago, during the lunchtime rush, and had yet to leave. Every time he looked her way, he found the woman biting down on her pencil, leaving tiny grooves in the wood. It looked like she was preparing for an exam if the papers were anything to go by, with notes and scribbles covering the blank spaces. "Yes, please." She picked the mug up and held in his direction, her eyes never leaving the paper. "How are you getting on?" "I can't say math was ever one of my fortes." "It's going fine. I'd be better with another cup of coffee though." One of his eyebrows went up, but he said nothing. Instead, he took the mug and went through with her next order. Despite professional courtesy, a small part of him was tempted to add a dash of chili sauce to the drink. Rude. As he fulfilled the order, little did he know, at that same moment a street over from the Fox's Den, the three goddesses of Olympus converged on its location. "No. No. Macy's is that way." Aphrodite pointed in the direction opposite to the way they were walking. "I saw the most beautiful pair of Gucci heels that would look great on you, Artemis. Every woman needs a pair of knockout heels." Why couldn't Artemis understand everything she was trying to do was ultimately for the betterment of the moon goddess? "Let me help you." Biting back a curse, Artemis pulled the struggling love goddess along the pavement. "And I told you, I don't need a stupid pair of heels. I'll take a pair of sandals or combat boots at any time of the week. Besides, Athena and I already made plans before you stuck your nose in." "But we could." "No." "Then, Howab." "No." Sighing, Athena turned and looked at the annoyed expressions on both goddesses' faces, though each for different reasons. "Aphrodite, you don't have to stay. You can go, and Artemis and I will continue our day without you." Huffing in annoyance, Aphrodite yanked her arms out of Artemis's grip and crossed them against her chest. A pout appeared on her face, but she knew there was nothing she could do to change her fellow Olympians' minds. Fine, but this place had better be as good as you're making it out to be. It will be. It better. Aphrodite watched as Athena's and Artemis both suddenly stopped and stared up, coercing her to do the same. When she did, she found herself looking at the most sickly shade of orange she could imagine, with a name written across it, the Fox's Den. She turned her attention back to the two goddesses. This is where you wanted to go? If you want to go to a cafe, I know a great little place in Paris. It's a terrace cafe at the western end of the Isle de la Cite. No, this will do fine. Athena retorted, not allowing Aphrodite to usurp their day off. Before Aphrodite could reply, Athena cut her off. Aphrodite, trust me when I say you are going to like it here. Opening the door, Athena eagerly walked inside, the bell ringing off and followed closely by Artemis, whose tongue was poking between her lips when she spied the cakes through the window. Realizing it wasn't going her way no matter what, Aphrodite relented and followed after them. Fine then. She hoped it would be worth it. The second she stepped through the doors, her negative thoughts melted away as a wave of warmth covered her body like a warm comforter, and the rich smell of chocolate and coffee enveloped her senses. The delightful aroma forced Aphrodite to stop in her tracks, and take a moment to bask in the glow she was feeling. Her eyes hovered across the room, taking everything in from the shade of the walls to the fixtures hanging from the ceiling. Oh, how quaint! She clapped her hands together, eliciting an eye roll from Artemis, though Athena seemed pleased at the reaction. It smells divine in here. I can see why you wanted to come here. Skipping forward, she mimicked Artemis's actions from the first visit and pressed her dainty hands against the glass cabinet. These look delicious. Proving her point, she licked her lips and tapped her fingers on the glass. As Olympus's leading authority on anything relating to chocolate and sweets, she was enjoying what she saw and smelled. Those eclairs look to die for. Welcome back. The three heard. Looking over the counter, Aphrodite found herself locking eyes with another pair of bright blue eyes as Naruto reappeared after returning from the back room. He wiped his brow, and smiled at the three women, and nodded his head towards Aphrodite. And you brought a friend. It's nice to meet you. Hello, handsome. Athena and Artemis's decision didn't seem like a bad one anymore. She understood why they were so eager. She would be too if he was the one serving them. Blonde hair and blue eyes. Tall and lean. Nice complexion and works in a cute cafe. Mama likes. The goddess of wisdom smiled at the blonde, ignoring the looks Aphrodite was giving the owner, and watched as he gathered three menus from behind the counter. To Aphrodite's surprise, even Artemis wore the tiniest smile on her face. Gone was the usual cold, or indifferent mask she'd seen her fellow goddess wear when in the presence of a male mortal. What in the world? It's nice to see you again, Naruto, Athena said, accepting one of the menus as he held them out to the three goddesses. Not wanting Aphrodite to be aware of her nerves on returning to the establishment, Athena buried those feelings away and behaved as she typically would. We hoped to come again sooner, but responsibilities tend to get in the way. You know how it goes. I sure do, and don't worry about it. He waved it off. Your table from before is free if you want it. Or would you like to sit elsewhere? Scanning the room, it was Artemis that spoke. May we take a booth? She pointed to the back of the room, where all the booths were currently available. Sure, make yourselves at home. I'll be over in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Heading towards the table, the trio of goddesses weaved their way through the interior, ignoring the stares they were receiving from the other patrons. Aphrodite couldn't help but give a wink to a cute-looking man sitting on his own close to the restroom and giggled when he nearly choked on his drink. Slipping into one of the available booths, Artemis claimed one side, while Athena and Aphrodite shared the other. I think I'm beginning to see why you girls like it here, Aphrodite said, making herself comfortable and slipping off her jacket, revealing a snow-white cardigan that showed off her perfect form and curves. The owner is a bit of a hunk, don't you think? Neither Athena nor Artemis replied, and soon, Aphrodite found herself holding back a giggle, amused at how serious they looked as they read the menu. What are you thinking, Artemis? Carrot cake again. Artemis shook her head. I'm not sure. It was heavenly last time, but I feel like I should try one of the others. Red velvet, maybe. There was too many to choose. That's a good one. Though, It would be hard to beat Aunt Hestia's red velvet cake from 7 years ago during the summer solstice. That's what I was thinking, but I'm tempted. I think I'll pick a hot chocolate again, though. Artemis looked up from her menu, her silver eyes staring into Athena's gray ones. Are you going with the lemon curd again? Aphrodite noticed the thick gulp by the goddess of wisdom and watched her bring the menu up close to her face. No, not this time. Besides, that was a special of the day. I doubt he will have it again. I might go for something a little different. Watching the back and forth, Aphrodite's lips formed a tiny O shape, listening to her fellow goddesses converse. She wanted to know what the fuss was all about. They talk as if it's the best thing in the world. Like many of Olympus's goddesses, Aphrodite had wined and dined in the finest establishments humanity had to offer. Whether it was the high society life of the rich and famous in Hollywood, New York, Paris, or London, and being catered to by the best chefs that ever lived, Aphrodite couldn't understand why Athena and Artemis were getting lost in the menu the way they were. Surely it wasn't that good? It was just a cafe diner in the middle of West Village. They weren't even on the Upper East Side. Not to mention no one in the world could compete with the delicious delicacies that Hestia, Hera, and Mother Rhea were known to create. It just wasn't possible. Opening up her menu, she scanned through the first page before her eyes widened. Wow! Look at that menu. There was so much to choose. Her favorite cafe in Paris didn't have a menu anything close to this. Oh! Today was going to be a good day. The table fell silent, each goddess finding themselves as wrapped up in what to choose as the other. Beneath the table, all three tapped their shoes against the hardwood floor as the choices ran through their minds. None of the three Olympians looked at each other, their eyes glued to the options. Athena had her eyes narrowed, Artemis was eagerly licking her lips, and Aphrodite was busy biting a nail. What to choose? As expected, after a couple of minutes passed, all three felt Naruto appear by their table, his notebook and pen in hand, and giving them all his trademark smile. Thanks for waiting. Are the three of you ready to order? Looking around the table, the blonde owner turned to Athena, deciding to start with her. Straightening her back, Athena cleared her voice. I believe so. She looked at the pair and saw them nod, though Artemis still looked a tad unsure. I'll take a latte please, though instead of vanilla, may I have a dash of cinnamon this time? She watched him nod his head and write the order down, and I remember seeing someone with eggs Benedict the last time I was here. I'll have one of those, please. Absolutely. Those are all great choices. When he turned to Artemis, the goddess appeared to have finally made her mind up. I'll take a hot chocolate, and this time, I'll get a slice of the chocolate coconut cake. Sure. What kind of hot chocolate would you like? I'm sorry. Artemis looked at the man in surprise and watched him scratch the back of his head. Oh, right. Sorry. I forgot you haven't visited in a few weeks. I've added a couple of different types of hot chocolate, besides the standard type you'd expect, and I'm waiting on the new menus to arrive. Would you like to hear them? Artemis said nothing and nodded. New types of hot chocolate? She hadn't prepared for this. Well, right now I have 6 types, but I'm planning on bringing in more over time. Naruto held out his fingers. We've got regular, Rocky Road, mint chocolate, white chocolate, salted caramel and orange chocolate. Each flavor made her eyes gleam, though one, in particular, stood out. I'll take the salted caramel. You got it. And don't forget the whipped cream and sprinkles. I would never be so cruel, he joked. Across from Artemis, Athena smiled at her sister's eagerness. No matter how cold or intense Artemis could become when crossed, the moon goddess would always be a child at heart. Even Aphrodite, who so desperately wanted to tease the younger goddess, couldn't bring herself to do so. She looked so cute and not at all like the huntress that struck fear into monsters everywhere. When he turned to Aphrodite, the love goddess batted her eyelashes at him. I'll take strawberry milkshake please. She lifted a delicate finger and pointed to something that caught her eye. I couldn't help but notice you have a section of entremets on the menu. I do, yes. Her smile widened, and leaned forward on the table. It's rare to find that type of dish outside of France done well. Most people tend to overpower one layer too much, causing the rest to suffer. You've sparked my curiosity. Her hand came up and rested in her palm, purposely posing in a way that enticed most men she met. Next to her, Athena and Artemis frowned. I'm no connoisseur, but I've spent a great deal of time in Paris and around France, learning the language. So, I know how a good entremet should taste. The blonde owner listened and smiled. If it helps you in making a decision, then you should know I learned how to make entremets during my time in Paris. Aphrodite's eyes shined at that piece of information. Take your pick, and I'll make it my duty to knock your heels off. Very well, challenge accepted. Winking up at him, she briefly looked across the selection before making up her mind. That one. The apple spice one, please. Good choice. After he finished noting the orders down, he bowed his head to the three ladies, though kept his eyes on the love goddess. Je reviendrai avec vos commandes sous peu. I will return with your orders shortly. A short gasp escaped from Aphrodite's lips as she watched him walk away. Before long, it was replaced by a smirk and gleam in her eyes that her fellow Olympians had seen one too many times. You didn't say he spoke French. This mortal got better and better by the second. Athena looked equally as surprised. I didn't know. Though he does speak Greek, and he did say he'd traveled around the world. Perhaps I should have foreseen the possibility that he could speak numerous languages by that information alone. Athena leaned back against her seat, ignoring Aphrodite's surprise, and watching him from the corner of her eye. He's a very surprising mortal. It had been some time since a mortal had piqued her interest in such a way. That was one more thing she could say that she liked about the blonde. He's might be the only male mortal I can tolerate. Artemis added, before narrowing her eyes at the love goddess, which is why I forbid you from trying to take him to your bed. What? Hey, you can't do that. Aphrodite whined, leaning forward and stared directly at the younger goddess. Besides, who's to say I would? Next to her, Athena scoffed. Don't think we don't recognize that gleam in your eyes, Aphrodite. We know how you operate. She warned, stealing her gray eyes, and I concur with Artemis. Don't get any funny ideas. Who I bring to my bed is my business. Not yours. Well, I like coming here, so I'm making it my business. Why don't you stick to your Girl Scouts, Artie? Why don't you stop corrupting every tolerable male out there? Maybe you'll notice more of them if you spoke first, and shot an arrow later. How about you close your legs for once, instead of acting like a 24/7 7-Eleven? Kick. Artemis's eyes widened, before leveling the love goddess with a glare. Did you just kick me? In response, Aphrodite did the grown-up thing and stuck her tongue out at the moon goddess. All right. That's it. Kicking the love goddess back in return, the two women spent the next couple of minutes kicking and stamping each other's legs, with each swing getting harder and more creative than the last. It would have been a comical sight watching the two beautiful goddesses squabbling if Athena hadn't manipulated the mist around them. To the eyes of the mortals around them, all they were seeing was the three women conversing casually. I should have known, Athena thought, observing the two squabble like children, both amused and annoyed at the same time. She could feel a headache coming on. The two were the polar opposites of each other, and they never failed in bringing out the worst in each other. Subtly, Athena moved any cutlery away from the moon goddess. She didn't need her sister getting any creative ideas. The moment she saw Naruto returning with their orders, Athena intervened and mimicked the actions of their Aunt Hestia and how she would stop the two from their petty arguments. She lurched forward and with both hands, grabbed an ear from each goddess and gave them a hard yank. Ow! Hey! Before either could say another word, the returning blonde reappeared by their table. Here you go, ladies. Enjoy. Placing their drinks in front of them, he followed up the action with Artemis and Athena's food, and turned to Aphrodite. Your order will be right out in a moment. Thanks. She replied, rubbing her ear and shooting a glare at Athena, who was smiling her thanks at Naruto. Once the pain in her ear passed, Aphrodite found herself gripping the straw of her milkshake. As she hoped, it was in a tall glass with whipped cream and rainbow sprinkles coating the top of the drink, and a small strawberry delicately placed on the rim. It smelled divine. Looking around the table, she found herself looking in amazement as Athena sunk into her seat, her latte cupped in one hand while the other held her fork. She looked completely and utterly at peace as she took a bite of her eggs Benedict. It was an expression she rarely saw from Athena, barring the occasions the goddesses of Olympus would commune around Hestia's hearth. Across from her, the annoyance slipped away from her occasional rival goddess, whose silver eyes lit up like a child on Christmas morning. Watching Artemis, she had to hold back a laugh as a mustache made of whipped cream coated her top lip, while her hand brought up a piece of her coconut cake, which looked incredible. She wanted to tease her but decided to leave it be. Puckering her lips, Aphrodite took a swig of her drink and blinked as the sweet drink enveloped her godly taste buds. It was neither too thick nor too thin, and walked that fine line between too sweet, and not sweet enough. To put it bluntly, Aphrodite thought it was one of the best milkshakes of her life. "Holy Mother of Rhea, that's good," she whispered, loud enough for Athena and Artemis to hear her, the former of who smirked as she enjoyed the taste of cinnamon in her latte. For the next minute, the three sat in silence, with Aphrodite swaying her legs from side to side beneath the table, her head resting in her palm as she relished in the taste of her milkshake. Oh, she was coming back for sure. She could see herself becoming a regular if everything was as good as this. She was so wrapped up with her delightful drink that she didn't even sense Naruto appear beside her and lay a plate in front of her. She was about to speak but found her words lost on her as she gazed down at the plate. "Oh my! Enjoy!" Walking away, Athena and Artemis looked up from their dishes, staring at the love goddess as she pushed her milkshake gently to the side, her hands clasping together as she stared down at her order. Neither woman could fault since both looked as mesmerized at the sweet treat on the plate. Sat on the top of the incredible-looking orange-colored pastry was a spiral-shaped apple garnish, and cinnamon sticks delicately leaning against the garnish. Like before with the lemon curd, Athena and Artemis thought it looked like something Hera would serve at her temple. The queen of the gods only accepted the best of the best, and the apple spice entr'amment Aphrodite ordered looked like it belonged nowhere else. "Wow," Artemis muttered. "It looked amazing." "It looks incredible," Aphrodite whispered, picking up her fork and digging into her sweet treat. Part of her didn't want to ruin the beauty of the dish. No one relished in beauty as she did. It was one of her domains after all. Slowly, she took a bite and fell back against her seat at the explosion of flavor. Her lips pursed together, and her fellow goddesses watched as her pupils exploded in a mirage of colors, like a kaleidoscope. "I think that's one more person won over." Both Athena and Artemis froze and steadily looked up from their meals. A flush of gold dusted across their cheeks. Across the room, like it did weeks earlier, the whole room went silent, and everyone, Naruto included, stared in Aphrodite's direction. The goddess of love cared little for the reactions going on around her, too busy enjoying her godly taste buds getting overwhelmed by the flavor. Artemis almost choked on drink. "Oh no. Not again. At least it wasn't me this time," Athena thought, her fork hanging in the air, watching Aphrodite dig into her meal like a woman possessed. "She's worse than Artemis." Bits of mousse covered her lips, and crumbs covered the edge of her mouth. Both did nothing but watch as Aphrodite finished off the dessert in a matter of moments. If they weren't blushing from Aphrodite's reaction, they would have been impressed by how quickly she devoured the dessert. Even Naruto, who busy preparing another order, stumbled at how loud Aphrodite was being. "Again," he thought. Handing the customer their drink, Naruto slowly walked over to the table. On the one hand, he was happy to see he'd won their little challenge. He'd yet to have a complaint come through his doors, and he didn't plan on starting today. On the other hand, did she have to be so vocal about it? His blue eyes gazed across to Athena, giving her a look amplified her embarrassment. "I guess you two must be related too, huh? You're a lot alike," he joked. Athena shrank in her seat, her hands covering her face. Just once, she'd like to come to the fox's den without being filled with embarrassment. Hearing his voice, the goddess of love turned her head, ignoring the fact she had mousse and crumbs all over the lower half of her face, and looked at him with widened eyes. Before Athena or Artemis could say or do anything, everyone watched as Aphrodite stood up on her seat, perfectly balanced in her heels and making herself taller than the blonde. The mirage of colors was rampant in her eyes, switching from blue, to green, to brown, and every other color imaginable, though only her fellow Olympians could see it. "Is everything okay?" The blonde owner started to speak, but was silenced when she rushed forward, slamming her lips against his. His eyes widened and felt a pair of arms snake around his head, her petite fingers threading themselves through his hair and pulling him in close. He could feel her nibbling against his bottom lip, and couldn't help but place his hands on her hips. He didn't know where else to put them. He could taste the apple and cinnamon from the dessert, along with the almonds he added to the mix. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, but he could feel the shocked expressions from his other customers staring at them. The clattering of cutlery dropping was a telltale sign. Aphrodite. That's the opposite of what we told you to do. Both Athena and Artemis lurched forward and grabbed the older goddess, pulling her back and forcing her back to her seat. Artemis looked as if she wanted to wring the love goddess's neck. This was what she was afraid of. You can't help yourself, can you? Artemis hissed. Athena glared at the back of Aphrodite's head. If it was possible, the goddess of wisdom would be glaring a hole into the back of her head. Their anger only intensified when Aphrodite started giggling. She batted her eyelashes his way and blew him a kiss. Say thank you like a normal person. Don't worry ladies, I'm sure he didn't mind. She continued to giggle, ignoring the fact that Artemis looked ready to combust. She wished she had her hunting knives with her. Slowly, her giggling ceased, and the blonde owner watched as she mouthed, "Merci pour le régal." Thank you for the treat. She sent a wink his way too. The surprised Naruto stood there staring at the three women, his free hand coming up and touching his lips. He could feel the sensation of her lips still on his, her tongue begging to wrestle with his. Tasting past the dessert, he detected a hint of honeysuckle and had a feeling there were smears of the woman's pink lipstick on his face. How long has it been since that happened? He honestly couldn't remember. Behind him, the bell to the fox's den rang, and Naruto took that as his cue to turn around and leave, ignoring the woman's resumed giggling. He weaved his way through the tables and chairs, ignoring the stares sent his way, and returned to his spot behind the counter, trying to control the blush on his face. Welcome to the fox's den. That's it for part 1. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.